Welcome to Mary Walter Radio, the podcast. How is everybody? Oh, my light's very bright, isn't it? Oh, I have to take that down just to I look like I'm dying on the surface of the sun. That's much better. Welcome to Mary Walter Radio. I am obviously Mary Walter. It is so great to have you here with me, joining me. Thank you to everybody who has subscribed, who's followed on Rumble, on Getter, on YouTube. Really appreciate you. Also, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Spreaker. I appreciate you so much. And please tell your friends. That would be great. Trying to grow the following because we do get great guests here, at least I think. On the channel, including our guest tonight, who is a repeat because he's a fan favorite. And so he is with us again tonight. Just a quick note, tomorrow I'm in for David Webb on Sirius Patriot Channel 125. And then on Friday, I'm in for Rob Carson from noon to 3 on his show. It's syndicated nationwide. If it's not near you, you can look for it on TuneIn. You can also look for it on WCBM. That's his home station. So WCBM, you can always find that, and you can listen to that online as well. So that's that. Without further ado, let me introduce to you my guest, the one and only John Lott Jr. He is the founder and the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. He is also the author of several books, including his two latest, More Guns, Less Crime, and Gun Control Myths. You can find him on X. I put the information in the description, and I will obviously put in the description on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Spreaker. John R. Lott Jr. for Junior on X. And you can go to the crimeresearch.org for the Crime Prevention Research Center. John, thank you for joining me. It's great to see you again.
Well, it's great to talk to you, Mary. It's nice to see you again.
Thank you so much. There's so much to talk to you about. There's just so much going on. I think the thing we have to start out with is the big story, and that's this murder that happened in North Carolina, this horrific slaughter on this train. I think it was light rail in Charlotte, North Carolina. And what really bothers me is this happened in August. This happened August 22nd, and it didn't get any attention until someone in conservative media. Oh, the video was leaked out. When the video was leaked out, then it started making the rounds, and people started to see it, and they were outraged. They wanted to keep this quiet. And for obvious reasons, and I think I know why. The guy who is accused of this horrific crime has been charged federally, had 14 prior arrests, 14, and his mother asked for him to get mental health treatment, and she said he's a danger. He shouldn't be walking the streets. What happened? Who dropped the ball?
Well, a lot of people dropped the ball on this. Unfortunately, it's kind of an attitude a lot of people have that I think is endangering others here. So, you have this notion that somehow certain groups of people shouldn't be punished more than, face higher rates of being incarcerated or, paying bail or whatever than other groups of the population. And so the former governor, Cooper, set up a panel where the then AG, who's now the governor, Stein, had a bunch of recommendations. One of the recommendations was to get rid of bail that was there. They also were concerned that blacks represented a greater percentage of the prison population than whites. This was all kind of started after the George Floyd incident in 2020. So this guy was the beneficiary of many of those reforms. He got out early. First of all, they didn't prosecute him for most of his crimes that he committed. Prosecutors didn't go forward. And then on the one that he did get prosecuted for, he was released early from prison. He should, by normal standards, he should still be in jail for that crime. He was released a year early at the beginning of the year. And then shortly after he was released, he committed another crime, but the judge in that case, in part because of these recommendations, didn't require that he have to put up a bond for it. And so, he was out. He shouldn't have been out for either of those reasons. You mentioned his mom. His mom tried to get him involuntarily committed. He was reviewed by psychiatric experts, and the psychiatric experts, as we see all too often, did not identify him as a danger to himself or others. And so he was released. And by the way, this is something that we see all the time. You look at these mass murderers, these mass public shooters that we've had. We've looked at carefully all the cases since 1998. Over half of them were actually seeing mental health care professionals prior to their attack. And yet, in not one single case did any of the mental health care professionals identify any of these individuals as a danger to themselves or others. And so this is no different in this case. Well, you have to understand there are multiple problems with the mental health area, but some of the problems are they're based on a model where people with problems come to them to go and get help. And so they assume that the people who are coming to them are being honest about how they're feeling about things. And when you read the diaries and manifestos for these mass murderers, they say, you'd have to be stupid to go and tell them when they ask you, are you having violent thoughts? Why would you tell them that you're having violent thoughts? They just assume you're being honest with them. Give you a couple cases. You have the Buffalo supermarket mass murderer from a few years ago. When he was in high school the year before, a teacher had asked him, well, what are you planning on doing over the summer? And after graduation, he said, well, I'm going to go and find a school that has summer school, and I'm going to go and shoot it up and kill as many people as I can, and then I'm going to go and commit suicide. Well, the teacher was concerned about him saying that, and so she flagged him, and he was taken in for mental health evaluation. He was hospitalized for 20 hours while two mental health care professionals talked to him. And they asked him about the statement. And he said, well, look, it was a dumb joke. I shouldn't have said it. I'm sorry. I won't make those types of jokes again. And, you read his manifesto that he has there, and he's basically saying, these guys were idiots. I'm not going to tell him what I'm planning on doing. He was already planning on doing the attack that's there. Right. And he told him that it was a joke. And so they said, okay, he was joking, and they let him go. You look at something like the Santa Barbara mass murderer. He was seeing the head of psychiatric services at Children's Hospital in Los Angeles, an internationally recognized expert on youth violence. And, the guy goes all over the world giving talks on this and has written numerous academic papers. And you read the killer's diary, and he's saying, look, the guy asked me whether I'm thinking about engaging in violent acts. And I just tell him no, because why would I tell him I'm going to do this? And he was already planning on doing these attacks. And so I can go through lots of stories, but you just see this happening time after time. And so the question becomes, if you can't identify these individuals beforehand, what's your backup plan? And, I hear everybody talking about we just need more mental health. Not really sure that that's going to solve the problem.
Yeah, well, and I want to ask you about that. First of all, let's just look at who's here. Porchview Farm is here. Scott's here. Bill's here. Watching your back. Rebecca Yitzhak is here. Street Preacher, US Now Text USA guy. There's a gnat in here. Oh dear. Lexus 360 over on Rumble. Hello. Am I getting paid for a product placement for polo jeans? No, I bought this at like Costco or BJ's, so I don't know if it's real.
It's nice.
Let's see. Yitzhak says the famous John Lott. Welcome. So let me ask you, we talk about mental health and everybody's like, oh, these guys are crazy. Oh, he should have been committed. But you just made a great point that maybe they're not crazy. This guy purposely waited until this woman, and I have to give Greg Gutfeld credit for making this point, that this guy on this train sat there and waited for her to sit down, and then very slowly took the knife out, very slowly knew that he could get her from behind. And he very quietly then walked to the front, took his sweatshirt off, walked off the bus. I don't know. The act seems like something a crazy person would do, but his actions before and after don't seem like a crazy person, right? Like, isn't that something that someone who has forethought and the ability to think ahead would do.
Yeah. Look, I don't try to get into people's minds on these things, but all I can tell you is I've read so many diaries and so many manifestos where these murderers have thought through what they're going to be doing on these things. So it's
Right.
not surprising to me that somebody, and the thing is, so virtually all these mass murderers are suicidal. They want to die, but they want to die in a way that's going to get them attention. And they may be crazy in some sense, but that doesn't mean they're stupid. And they go and plan these things in minute detail. A lot of these things they're planning 6 months in advance. Somebody like the Sandy Hook killer planned it over 2.5 years prior to the attack. I don't know how long this guy on the train was planning this type of attack.
Hmm.
Maybe we'll find out eventually that it was a while. One of the comments that he apparently made that's caught on tape is he was saying, like he was gloating over the fact that he had killed a white person.
I
So
got the
maybe he
white
was
girl.
looking, right?
Yeah.
So maybe, he was looking for that type of target and she presented herself there. But
Is that
the thing
why? Let me
I'm
just ask you a
sorry.
question. Just that point right there. I just want to ask you a question. You make so many good points and I can't remember them all. So is that why you think this was kept quiet? It wasn't really reported in the news because it didn't fit the narrative. Because here's this black man who kills this young woman, a refugee from Ukraine, and he is heard saying, "I got the white girl." I killed the white girl. That they didn't want that out there because it's not the narrative that the
Right.
media wants out there. It doesn't fit the narrative. Is that why it took this long since the 22nd of August till now to find this out?
Well, I assume the video coming out had something to do with the getting attention. Obviously some people would have known about this beforehand. Axios Charlotte apparently had an article on this about the time that it had happened. Um, but, so at least some people in the news media knew that something like this was going on. But, we did a study a while ago looking at police killings. And what you found is that if a white officer killed a black officer, the race of both the officer and the person who was killed were mentioned. If a white officer killed a white suspect, only the race of the officer would be mentioned. If a black officer killed a white suspect, then the race of neither would be mentioned in the news stories. And if a black killed a black, then only the race of the victim would be mentioned. So
Oh.
and uh, you know, I look at something like that, and I don't blame a lot of people for thinking, for filling in the blanks when they don't hear the race of these people, because all the times that they do hear about the race, it's going to be a white officer killing a black. And so people may think, I mean, it's not that common for unarmed people, as you probably know, uh, criminals. And most of them, when they say unarmed, when the Washington Post would go and collect these stories and say they're unarmed, they could be armed with a vehicle, they could be armed with a baseball bat, they could be armed with a
Mhm.
knife, but they consider unarmed as long as they don't have a gun that's there, and they may be committing a crime when they're shot, or they may be threatening, or the attacker may be much larger than the police officer, you know, uh, there and threatening them. So, uh, I think there's a long history of how the media covers these things, and so I it's surely consistent with the pattern that we've seen before in terms of it. I don't think anybody would think it would be surprised if the races were reversed. Um, they would believe that it would get a lot of attention, I think, particularly if the murderer there had made a comment about, I got the black woman there or something like that. There would be front page New York Times for weeks afterwards in the
Yeah.
Washington Post. So To me, I look at the media coverage and I think the media coverage is very racist in the sense that they're deciding what to cover based on the race of the victim rather than on the characteristics of the crime that's there.
So, and I just want to get to some of the comments. Yitzhak says situational awareness is so necessary, and many do not take that seriously. If a sketchy guy sits behind you, near you, or in the vicinity of you, you get up and move. She chose that seat. She sat
Right.
down, probably thinking that there was no problem. Gregory says that he understands that that guy beat his sister to a pulp. I did not hear about that. Oreo's here.
Well,
Paul is here.
the mother was scared of him. She was worried that
Yeah.
he would engage in violence. I don't know. It wasn't clear to me. I thought from the way the news articles, but God only knows how much information's in the news articles, was indicating that it was violence towards her that she was concerned about. But it could be one of her family members too.
Yeah. Scott makes a point. He says, Scott says, this reminds me of how after in some past incidences, the FBI had clues from callers. They had the clues there, but they had so many, they didn't know which one to take seriously. It's kind of the same thing. And this guy had so many priors, but hadn't really done anything. He hadn't hurt anybody yet. So, we're just
He
gonna let him
engaged in
go.
armed robbery. He had engaged in aggravated assault. Those are people get
Oh,
hurt
okay.
for those things. He had also done other, shoplifting and other types of crimes, but he had a long list of crimes, including violent crimes.
Mm, yeah. Yitzhak says, this is why we need constitutional carry, reciprocal, all 50 states, and not just one magazine. I usually carry 3. He's in Florida. How do you feel about that?
That's
Do we need reciprocal constitutional carry?
Well, sure. I'm not sure that that would have necessarily been the difference here. With the thing that's important here is that this, and it's something that's troubled me a lot. You, there are people sitting right next to her. There's a guy in the same row, just across the aisle from her. There's a woman behind. There are other people right around there. There are people that are facing her, and but nobody does anything. Nobody moves. Nobody tries to do anything. So, one of the things that's true for this case is that this was a gun-free zone. Public transportation in Charlotte, you're not allowed to have a permanent concealed handgun with you. And uh, you know, if a large person has a knife, I can understand the trepidation somebody has to go and physically confront the person that's there.
Right.
But that's one of the benefits of having a gun there to go and do it. So you may have heard a few months ago there was this attack at a Walmart in Michigan where 10 people were stabbed, and what happened was is multiple people tried to go up and stop the guy, and they got stabbed, and some of them ended up being in serious condition. Fortunately, there was a retired Marine who had gone target shooting in the morning and still had his handgun with him, and he was able to stop the attack because he didn't have to physically come into contact with the person there. He pointed his gun at
Right.
him and he said, "Drop your knife or I'm going to shoot you." Okay. And if the person had come at him, he would have shot him. But the benefit of having a gun means you can try to resolve the situation. You didn't have to shoot the guy because the guy put down his knife there because of the threat. But the point is that with a gun, you don't have to get into physical contact with the person. If you take a concealed carry class, they're going to tell you you're not the police. Your job isn't to go and arrest the person. The benefit of you having a gun is to keep the criminal away from you. Okay. A police officer can't do that. A police officer can't just brandish a gun and watch the criminal run away and say his job is done. He has to be willing to come into physical contact. And that's often, many times, what puts the officer's life in danger when they have to come into physical contact with the person. But I can only guess, I can only wonder, you know, one, if this hadn't been a gun-free zone, might this person have been different in terms of deciding to do it? Two, if there had been somebody there on the train who had a gun, would they have been braver in terms of going and trying to stop the attack that was occurring or to try to stop the guy that's there?
Yeah. What I also noticed is I thought she like died right away, but she didn't. And I didn't, they cut out the actual attack, but
Well,
she's
they've
sitting there on
shown
her
it now.
knees.
You can find video online. Libs of TikTok has the rest of the video up there,
I don't
and
need to see her. I don't
yeah,
need to see
well,
like the actual
she
stabbing. I don't
basically,
need to see that.
I don't know whether it's like a minute or I haven't timed it yet, but she is trying to stop the bleeding that's there. She basically sits in the chair for a minute, you know,
Right.
cries a little bit, and then after a while she passes out and she dies. But it just
But well, tell me if I'm right here. No one gets up to help her. Like, I understand not confronting the crazy huge guy with the knife. Like, I get that. But the woman who was sitting next to her across the aisle from her just kind of goes like this, doesn't even go over to help her. Like, I,
right,
I don't understand how you don't. Not one person came to her aid. Not one from what I saw in the video. Now, I may be wrong, but my God, where are we as a society? We're not even, someone doesn't even come to your aid to try to help you. Not that they could have done anything. I'm sure like those were death blows that she got with the knife, probably maybe her carotid artery, whatever.
yeah,
But my God, go up and hold her hand, comfort her, whatever. I
right.
don't know.
But,
That bothered me the
somebody would
most.
know to put pressure on it. Maybe
Right.
that would stem the bleeding to some extent. But we have had people like Daniel Perry come and try to save people there, and one obviously knows the story of how his life was messed up for a long
Right.
period of time after that. I have no idea what goes through people's minds. I I was trying to, though, a few minutes ago, make the same type of comments that you're making now. It just stunned me that everybody is just sitting there and nobody is doing anything, either accosting the guy or, as you're pointing out, coming to her aid right away. After she collapses, then somebody comes to her. But and I don't know what they try to do or what their knowledge was of the medical care to go and provide for her. But it's just such a tragedy. You have this 23-year-old woman who apparently has several different jobs and trying to make a good life and everything, and it's just cut short. And as we say, this guy should have still been in jail. He shouldn't have been released early. He should have had to put up bail. The mental health care experts, you would like to think, would be able to somewhat identify these individuals beforehand, but they can't. In fact, there's a whole academic literature out by psychiatrists and psychologists about their inability to identify these individuals as a danger to themselves or others. And
Mhm.
so, um,
Yitzhak says here, the passengers got up and left. Kitty Genovese all over again. Kitty Genovese being
okay,
the famous case in New York, I think in the 60s, where she was being raped. She was a nurse coming home, and everyone could hear her screaming on the street, but everybody just closed their windows and nobody went down to help her. And they said from that, I remember there was a study they found that if one person makes a move, other
right,
people will follow. And it takes that one person to make that move, someone like a Daniel Perry. But
right.
unlike Kitty Genovese, instead of people urging you to do that, you learned you're going to get punished. So I think that's why people just don't get involved now, because the government has taught us a very valuable lesson about getting involved.
I hope that's not the case. Look, there's famous research by a guy named James Q. Wilson about broken windows. And his idea
Yes.
was partly you want to make it so that people aren't scared of being out and about. So if you have broken windows, if you have a lot of crime that's occurring, if people think that they don't want to be out there. And one of the benefits of having people out and about in a town is that you have witnesses. And maybe somebody will come forward, like you're saying there. But it makes it more difficult for criminals to go and commit a crime if there are lots of people around and hopefully, somebody will do something, or somebody will at least be there as a witness to go and identify them later.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what Rudy Giuliani did in New York, the broken windows
Right.
form of policing, and he cleared it up after de Blasio. They need another Giuliani now, excuse me, after Dinkins. They need
Right.
another Giuliani now to clean it up after de Blasio, and I don't think, what's his name is gonna be, Mamdani is gonna make it, a lot worse. So, so I have so many questions for you. It seems to me, speaking of mental health, and I know this is not your area of expertise, but it does play into the whole gun thing. Um, what it seems to me that there are just a lot more crazy people walking around on the streets. Like since COVID, there's a lot of people letting their freak flag fly. It seems to me, I could be wrong, but it seems that way. As if we have normalized this damn gnat is gonna. Did I get it? I don't know if I got it. There's this one gnat has been flying. Anyway, I'll get him. I'm gonna get him sometime during this. He's gonna land and he's mine. For little buggers, they're very fast. But what was I saying? I forgot what I was saying. But anyway, it just seems to me that there is that since COVID, we've normalized a lot of mental illness. I think that we have normalized, like the school shooter at the Catholic school with those little kids who got shot. That guy, I mean, he was bat crap crazy, but 20 years ago, I think he would have been flagged and not been able to buy those guns legally. Because 20 years ago, if you saw an 18-year-old, a 17-year-old who wanted to change his name to a girl's name, so much so, like it wasn't a joke, he had his mother go down and change it for him. And we act like it's all perfectly normal. As an adult, if you want to make that decision, that's fine. But I think as a child, it's a sign of a deeper mental illness. These people who are on, these kids who are on all these ADD, ADHD drugs and all this other stuff, we normalize it. Now, oh no, there's nothing wrong with you. You're mainstream. Everything's fine. And maybe we need to stop normalizing it all, and more of these people would get flagged and wouldn't be able to at least buy their guns legally. What do you think about that?
Right. Well, this guy who did the attack at the Minneapolis school, if you read his manifesto, he was surely suicidal. I mean, he openly talks about there multiple times about wanting to die. And that's something that you see very common in these mass murders. Now, one thing about trans, they are overrepresented in terms of their share of mass public shooters by about 7 times their share of the population. So, and I guess I'm not super surprised by that, given that people who have gone through the transitioning there for trans commit suicide at very high rates. And so given the fact that that seems to be one almost universal feature of these individuals, that they're suicidal, it's not surprising to me that these trans individuals are well overrepresented in terms of that.
That's an interesting statistic. I'm going to have to remember that. Thank you for that.
But you have, the problem that you have with to take away somebody's ability to have a gun, you have to have them by law involuntarily committed. You have to have it so, at least with the civil commitment process, you have to have a hearing, and there has to be a finding that the person is a danger to themselves or others. So if somebody is clearly suicidal, then they're a danger to themselves. One of the big problems with these red flag laws, where the only thing that they do is take away a person's guns. It's bizarre. You have Democrats in North Carolina, which are calling for red flag law. The guy didn't even use a gun to go in and kill this woman. He used a knife. And red flag laws, the only thing they do is take away a person's guns. But so every state has what's called civil commitment. If you're concerned about somebody, you can go and call the police. The police will come out. And if the police believe that there's, quote, a reasonable probability, which is like a 20% chance that the person is a danger to themselves or others, then they can be taken in for immediate mental health evaluation. Depending upon the state, you can have anything from 1 to 3 different mental health care people that will review somebody. If the mental health care people believe that there's a reasonable probability that the person is in fact a danger to themselves or others, then what will happen is there can be an immediate hearing. If you can't afford a lawyer, one's provided for you, and then evidence is presented there. And if the judge, it depends on whether it's preponderance of evidence or beyond a reasonable doubt, it depends on the state. But if the judge finds that in fact you are a danger to yourself or others, then the judge has a range of options. They can say, look, if you voluntarily go and see a mental health care professional, we'll have a hearing in another week or 2 or 3 weeks, and we will reevaluate the situation. If he's worried that the guy's going to try to drive a car through a group of people, he'll take away his driver's license or impound his vehicle. If he thinks he's going to shoot people, he can take away his gun. But in the most extreme case, he can involuntarily commit the person. And the thing is, with these red flag laws, as I said, the only thing that the judge can do is take away a person's guns. They're overwhelmingly used because of concerns about suicide. But if somebody's really suicidal, is taking away their guns solving it? As if there are not other ways that they could commit suicide?
Right.
You know, the problem that you have is that they're not getting any mental health care there. You know, if you really believe somebody is suicidal, then you want to make sure that they're committed, that they are watched, that they are given mental health care so that they are stopped from committing suicide. If you really think that they're trying to go and kill people, taking away their gun that they may legally own, maybe they'll get one illegally, maybe they'll go and drive a car through a crowd of people someplace, maybe they'll do something else to try to go and kill people, you know, take a knife or whatever.
Right.
And, you know, there have been plenty of big casualty events with people driving a vehicle through a crowd of people. And in fact, probably the deadliest attack that I know of is Nice, where
Yeah.
a truck was driven through a crowd of people. But, you know, it's just, you have, but again, we kind of come back to this thing about what happens when the mental health care people aren't able to go and identify these people. What's your backup plan on this?
Yeah. Let's go to some of there's some really smart comments here. Star Driver One says you need to know Charlotte criminal prosecution. Unless you commit murder in Mecklenburg County, Charlotte, you don't go to jail. This is from a Charlotte police officer. I live north of Charlotte. And he says it doesn't help when the city council is a bunch of thugs. Literally, the sheriff is anti-ICE and is hated by every surrounding county sheriffs. So, you know, when you were talking before, John, about, you know, how the media spins these things and they say that you know, if it's a white cop who kills a black guy, then both races are mentioned, and how they break that down. Did the suspect get more leniency than a white criminal who had done the same thing would have gotten?
Well, yeah,
So in
I
other
mean,
words,
they set up this commission after George Floyd to try to make it, you know, this racial equity with regard to justice, where, you know, they want to make sure that the percentage of the population by race in prison corresponds to their share of the population, that the percentage of people who, you know, have bail, make bail, is the same across races. And so this individual was released early. It appears because of his race. He was not required to have bail earlier this year when he committed another crime. You know,
I guess
here's the thing that baffles me. If you care about blacks, and Democrats say that they do, who do they think the victims of crimes are? You know, blacks, 90% of blacks are killed by other blacks. So if you want to
yeah, black on black crime.
go easy on black criminals, that means you're not going easy on the black victims of those crimes. Who should you care about the most? You know, it just, Trump, with regard to DC, you have people like Maryland Governor Wes Moore essentially calling Trump a racist for going and intervening in federalizing law enforcement in DC, saying because it is a, you know, black dominated area. You know, I only have data up through 2021, but 96% of the murder victims are black. So you have, you have this 13-day stretch recently where there were no murders. You have 21-day stretch where there were 2 murders that had occurred in DC. How many lives do you think were saved? And who were the victims? You're
Right.
saving a lot of Black lives that are there. You know, why does it only count? They say Black Lives Matter, but why is Trump a racist when the people whose lives are being saved are Blacks? And it's not just murder. The victims overwhelmingly of crime in many different areas, the direct are Blacks in that area, and they're hurt indirectly. You have businesses who close. Who likely disproportionately owns the businesses? Blacks. Who works in the stores, who lose their jobs because the
Right.
stores are closed? And who shops in those stores? Oh, disproportionately Blacks. Who pays higher prices for the stores that remain open but have to cover the cost? You've lived in the DC area. If you go to a CVS or a Walgreens nowadays, everything is behind plexiglass. If
Yeah.
you want to go and buy something, you have to wait for a clerk to come over, open the plexiglass, and then they have to stand next to you while you read the package's ingredients. I felt incredibly guilty making the person. I didn't want to spend the 3 or 4 or 5 minutes I would normally spend to decide which packet I'm going to do. I just bought something quickly. But can you imagine how much that increases the cost of doing business?
Sure.
The things that
Sure.
they have to recoup that in terms of the prices that they have there. So that means all these customers there are poorer because the prices for what they're
Or
buying
more.
is higher than it would have been otherwise.
Yeah.
And so
It's
you're
more
hurting them in
expensive.
so many different ways. The people who own houses are disproportionately Black. What do you think happens to the prices of housing when property values are depressed because of higher crime rates that are there?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great point. It's a great point. But Gregory makes a good point too. He says the entire world emptied their insane asylums into Biden's USA. That's a big part of the problem in my mind. And I think he's right. Oh, he's freaking Nat. Yeah, I do think that that's part of it. And along those lines, Manglemush says gender dysphoria is still listed as a mental disorder in the DSM of psychiatry, and DSM-5 it is there. Gender dysphoria. So getting back to, the shooter at the Annunciation school, he bought those guns legally because he had a clean record. There was nothing there that popped up, right?
Right. Well,
And and I
you have to distinguish between two things: a mental illness and whether they're a danger to themselves or others. The way,
yeah,
I mean, I guess you could change the law, uh, but I think it's valuable to have some type of standard, like the person's a danger to themselves or others. Now, is it true a lot of these trans individuals are suicidal, and maybe you could use that? Yeah, but again, you kind of often depend upon these individuals to admit that they're
right.
suicidal. Okay, and the danger of having it so that you don't have to go and meet a standard like that is people on the left could go and define mental illness in some way that could go and prevent a lot of people from being able to go and have guns. And one other thing I'll just say is people with mental illness generally tend to be less violent on average than the general population. And they also more likely tend to be victims of violent crime than the general population. You look at something like schizophrenia, for example. We have something like between 3.5 and 3.9 million people with schizophrenia in the United States. If you look at mass public shooters since 2019, there's been one person who had been diagnosed with schizophrenia before they engaged in their attack. So if you were to go to a mental health care professional and say, look, pick the 1,000 people who have schizophrenia who are most likely to engage in one of these attacks, even if the guy who committed the attack over those 6 years was one of the 1,000 that you picked, you still would be wrong 999 times out of that. And in fact, that's the explanation that a lot of the mental health care academic articles give about saying, it's just very hard to go and identify these individuals. But if you can identify somebody as a danger to themselves or others, then fine. I think
Yeah.
they should lose their ability to go and have a gun. Uh,
Yeah.
but you have two problems with that. One is, it's not that hard for people to illegally buy a weapon. The major source of illegal guns are drug gangs, drug dealers. It's not like a drug dealer can go to the police and say, "Look, this other gang stole our drugs. Can you help us get them back?" The drug dealers essentially go and set up their own little militaries to protect that extremely valuable property that they have. So they make money selling drugs, but they also make money selling weapons that are there. So it's about as hard to stop somebody from buying a gun illegally as it is to stop somebody from buying illegal drugs. I don't know, when I go to college campuses and give talks, and I've asked students, I say, if I gave you a day or so, what percentage of you could go and buy, cocaine or something? And, half the students raise their hands thinking that they can go and do something like that. Whether they actually can or not, I don't know. But it's just, um, and so that's one of the problems that you face. And the other one is just, so it's very difficult to stop them from getting it. And two,
Yeah.
you have a hard time properly identifying people who actually are a danger to themselves or others.
Yeah. That's a good point. Star driver who lives north of Charlotte and I don't know if he is a former police officer there or knows police officers there. He said knives are also illegal to carry on the cats. So this killer shouldn't have even had a knife on the light rail system. But the point is to your point, gun-free zones, only law-abiding people follow the law. So criminals, when you say gun-free zone, it's a huge advertisement to them this is a really easy place to commit your crime because literally no one is going to be able
It's even worse.
oppose you.
You're right, exactly right. It's even worse though than what you're saying. So um, I don't know what the criminal penalty for taking a weapon on the train there, but take something like the Minneapolis Catholic shooting. If somebody takes a gun onto school property, whether it's a private school or public school in Minnesota, it's a 5-year prison term. Okay. For you or I to go and violate the law there, 5 years would completely destroy our lives. I mean, we'd be
Right.
felons. Our lives would be completely destroyed. But if you're somebody who's murdering multiple people and you are planning on murdering multiple people, and even if you had lived, obviously the shooter in Minneapolis died, so the penalties are irrelevant. But let's say they had lived, they'd be facing multiple life sentences, plus God knows how many other penalties and prison terms for all the people that they wounded that were there, the 17 people that were wounded. Um, the notion that you're going to take 5 years away from maybe the sixth life or something for that person just isn't a penalty. And this guy, maybe let's say he faces a couple years prison for taking a knife onto a train, which is a gun-free zone or a weapon-free zone. Um, he's going to face life in prison for the murder. So is taking away 2 more years from his second life, is that going to deter him? And so what you've
Right.
done is, even though I understand the desire for people to go and set up safe areas, what you've done is you've set up the criminal penalties so that the only people you're deterring are the good people. They're the
Right.
ones who face the real penalties. The people who are committing the crimes don't face any real additional penalty. So all you've done is kind of guarantee to the bad guys that they'll be the only one with a weapon, because the penalties that are set up will deter any law-abiding citizen, not just for the reason what you're saying, but also for the fact that they're going to face real penalties that the bad guy won't face.
Right. And it's a perfect setup. Like they're doing exactly the opposite of what they want to achieve. They're achieving the actual opposite. And you talk about a good guy with a gun in Israel when that terror attack happened at the bus depot. What was that? 2 days ago, yesterday. Those two guys were stopped because two citizens with guns stopped them. And what I also thought was interesting is that the one of the people in the back of the bus who survived said that the bus driver stopped at the depot. I closed the door but wouldn't let anybody off. And they sat there for a couple minutes and wouldn't let anybody off. and then opened the door and let the 2 terrorists on. So those people were sitting ducks and had no
But,
chance.
Israel's an interesting situation. If you go back to 2000, you had about 14% of the adult Jewish population was legally licensed to carry guns. But people like George Soros and stuff were funding a lot of these, what I consider pretty bogus public health studies, and they managed to reduce the percentage of the population before October 7th down to about 2% of the adult Jewish population. I could only wish that some people at the concert, for example, were carrying. How that could have turned out differently if you had some people there carrying. Now, since then, on October 8th, they've loosened up a lot of the rules, and it's gone up to, I guess, like 7% of the adult population with a license to carry. They still need to do more, I think. When it happened was at the beginning of 2023, when Netanyahu's government got back into power, even though it was classified as like the most conservative government ever in Israeli history. Netanyahu tried to liberalize the rules for getting licenses to carry guns, but he couldn't get the rest of his government, all the parties, to agree to that. So they weren't able to go and do that. It was only after October 7th that they were able to go and loosen it up to some degree, but they still haven't been able to pass the necessary legislation to loosen it up as much as they should. So, but the fact that almost 8% of the adult Jewish population versus 2% before, I mean, that's still a significant increase. It made it more likely that the type of people that you were talking about who were able to go and stop that attack were there. Maybe, I don't know how recently they got their permits, but if they've gotten it in the last couple of years, they might not have been able to help before that.
One of them was a sergeant who was a member of the recently formed ultra-Orthodox Hasmonean Brigade, founded in 2024, that allows ultra-Orthodox men to serve while maintaining their religious lifestyle. And the other one was a student who recently was granted a firearm license. He was on his way to yeshiva, and he emptied his magazine on the terrace. I was just in Israel 3 weeks ago, and we were at the scene of the Nova Music Festival. We were at one of the kibbutzes that was just overrun. And it was interesting, and you would have appreciated this. There's this group of American conservative journalists sitting in their meeting room at this kibbutz, the kibbutz that was overrun. And what their system was they weren't armed. They had a security team of like 12 people that would go and get the guns out of where the guns were stored if they were needed. And the border with Gaza was right there. Like we walked to it. It's right there. So in the morning of October 7th, they had nothing. And the residents didn't own weapons. And we asked them, like, well, you're that close to people who want to slaughter you and wipe you from the planet. Why doesn't anybody have any weapons? And you know what their response was? Well, it's the IDF's job to keep us safe. Well,
you're right.
How did that work out?
Right. Well, the IDF obviously couldn't be there all the time and quickly to protect people, but which is your point. But beyond that, there were a couple areas where people went into the storage areas for the weapons and brought them out, breaking the law, to go and hand them out to people. And those were the places where they were able to stop the terrorist attacks that were there. And so, it's crazy how, they have these rules that they think are making people safer. And, I can only hope that, there are more changes that occur.
Yeah. Stag over on Rumble. He's hitting Rumble saying, libtard, how many children have to die before you'll give up your guns to protect them? Me, how many children have to die before you'll pick up a gun and protect them? Crickets.
Right.
Yeah. Let's see. He says,
But
John,
make one comment on that before we go on.
Yeah, go ahead.
That is, So we've looked at all the school shootings in the United States, anything from an accidental discharge all the way up to a mass public shooting from 2000 up through 2023. We're putting data together for 2024 right now at the moment. It looks like that will continue. Every attack where anybody's been killed or wounded has all occurred in schools where teachers and staff are banned from having guns. Something well over 10,000 schools in the United States, public schools, have armed teachers and staff. Okay. And so, when you read the diaries and manifestos that we're talking about before, I just want to read you this quote from this is just one of the quotes from the guy who did the attack at the Minneapolis school. I recently heard a rumor that James Holmes, the Aurora theater shooter, may have chosen venues that were, quote, gun-free zones, end quote. I would probably aim the same way. Holmes wanted to make sure that his victims would be unarmed. That's why I and many others like schools so much. At least for me, I am focused on them. Adam Lanza is my reason, end quote. So Lanza, of course, did the Sandy Hook school shooting in Newtown. And I don't know how much more explicit these guys
Right.
can be on these types of things.
But I have to tell you, that's the first time I've heard that quote.
Here's
that should be out
he also
more,
has other
don't you think?
quotes in there about the fact that why he did it at the time of day. He said he had thought about maybe doing it in the morning when the parents were dropping off the kids at school or when they were picking them up, but he was worried that if he did it there, that maybe one of the parents would have a concealed carry permit and be able to go and stop him from doing it. So he wanted to do it during the middle of the school day. So he has multiple discussions about this. The quotes on our website, I have a list of similar quotes from other mass murderers going back decades. And the thing is, and this is like one of my biggest pet peeves with the media. We talked about media bias before. These guys explicitly explain why they pick the targets that they do. But you will never see, people like you're well read, you're educated on all sorts of issues. You don't know this stuff because the media absolutely refuses to cover this part of the manifestos and diaries. Now, I want someone to explain to me why this isn't considered newsworthy for why these people pick the targets that they do. Why isn't that considered newsworthy?
I think it is. And I'm glad
and these statements go all the way back to Columbine. I mean, it's not as explicit with Columbine, but the New York Times even had a front page story after Columbine where Dylan Klebold and his father were very upset about Colorado considering a concealed carry bill that was going through the state legislature at the time. That bill would have allowed teachers and staff to carry permanent concealed handguns on schools in Colorado. Doug Dean, who was the majority leader in the House, I actually was in Colorado that morning of the Columbine attack. I had been invited out by Doug Dean to go and talk to state legislators because the day of the Columbine attack was the day that final passage was scheduled for a vote in the state legislature. And so the Columbine attack occurred literally just a few hours before the final vote was scheduled to occur that would have allowed teachers and staff to carry. And Doug Dean told me that Dylan Klebold had written both of his state legislators demanding that they vote against the bill. So here you have a guy, he's upset about a bill that would allow teachers and staff to carry. He does the attack the very day, within hours of when the final passage is going to occur in the state legislature. Is it a coincidence? I don't have the direct quotes that I have for this guy here, but it surely seems, so we have bowling for Columbine, which makes a big issue about them bowling in the morning beforehand. But, the media, even though this was on the front page of the New York Times, that he was strongly against the concealed carry bill there, and Doug Dean has spoken out about this. For some reason, it's not. But I have many more direct comments over the years,
Yeah,
and
we'll
it's
have
on the
to.
front of
So
our website.
yeah,
I've
if you and the
updated it.
website is crimeresearch.org.
Right.
Crimeresearch.org. I'm going to be going there. Let's see. Star says also makes a good point. He says the other problem, John, is straw purchases. The ATF no longer chases those down. Legal people buying guns for prohibited persons. I have an FFL that told me that
Well,
they're
I
not
don't know. I
chasing it
mean, they
down
were.
anymore.
Uh, I don't know why they say they haven't gone after them, but look, uh, the notion that it's hard to go and enforce straw purchases. Okay, somebody can go and buy a gun for somebody else, and you know, uh, you have to prove that they did that knowingly. Um, and I just haven't really seen a lot of evidence that they're able to go and identify these individuals very well. But I have a hard time believing that the Biden administration wasn't enforcing this, and I haven't seen any evidence that the Trump administration has changed that particular policy.
Yeah. Um, my friend just texted me and said, "I'm gonna get that gnat for you." This thing landed on my
Yeah, well,
face while you were
here I
talking.
thought you were waving to me the whole time that you wanted to be
Damn it.
nice.
He landed on my face right here. He's right there. He landed on my
Okay.
face. Uh,
Well,
that's
I'm
okay.
sorry you're having to endure that.
It's okay. I can think of worse things. It's just a gnat. They're just annoying. Uh, Get Stag over on Rumble says you don't get to pick the day you need a gun. Someone else will pick that day, and they will only tell you at the very last second.
Right.
He's
No, I mean, it's like having a fire extinguisher or something like that. You have it
yeah,
around there, just on the chance that you may need to use it at some point in time.
yeah.
And
Oreo says North Carolina lawmakers are now calling for the removal of Judge Teresa Stokes after releasing 14-time repeat offender DeCarlo Brown Jr. caught on video fatally stabbing Irina Zarutska. Yeah, some of these judges are part of the problem too, but it goes back to the lawmakers who make the laws that allow these judges to let someone walk after being convicted of crimes 14 times.
right,
14 times. A huge rap sheet. So that's
right.
the lawmaker's fault.
Well, it's both, and the lawmakers, the governor and the attorney general at the time, the person who's now the governor, Stein. Uh, they had this commission and put out these recommendations that judges across the state are following, particularly ones who are sympathetic to not punishing people who are committing crimes and taking into account the race of the person who's committing the crime and determining what the penalty should be. And again, the problem with that is who do they think the victims of these criminals are? People tend to commit crimes against people who are similar to themselves, both in race and socioeconomic background. So, blacks, Democrats may claim that they care about blacks, but when they care about black criminals, it's black victims that are being harmed.
Right. Yeah, we keep coming back to that. Stag says, you know damn well, John, that goes clear back to the Texas University Tower shooting back in 1996. I don't know what he's referring to. It was about 6 minutes ago. I don't remember what he's talking about there.
Yeah, no, well, there was a famous shooting that occurred
Yeah, I mean, I know about
there from
that.
the tower at the University of Texas. Look, that individual had a brain tumor and had other issues that were going on, and but people have always wanted to commit suicide, but at some point along the line, they realized that they could get national or international attention by going and killing lots of other people. So they figured, well, if I can go and kill myself, but if I can go and do it as part of this other thing, they'll write things like, well, at least my name will be in the history books. At least people will know that I'm here. You have all these guys who write things, and it's overwhelmingly guys who do these things, who write things like, women won't go out with me on dates. At least they'll know I was here and, appreciate, I don't know. If a guy thinks that a woman's going to be attracted to him because they killed lots of people, I kind of it's kind of obvious why women weren't going out with them to begin with. But it's just,
Bingo.
but
Absolutely. Star Driver makes a great point here. He says the Nashville shooter didn't go to one school because the security was too tight. So she went to the Christian school
right.
where she knew they didn't have armed security.
Yeah, well, no, that's exactly right. So, there you have a situation, and that's one person I have quotes regarding on our website. Uh, the Nashville police chief, the day of the attack, had read at least part of her diary and said that she had looked at other targets, but had decided not to go through them. Like one of them was the Green Hills Mall that was there, but they allowed people to carry concealed carry at the Green Hills Mall. And so, because there were armed people there, she had decided not to go there. So, here, it's just an example of the media bias. So even when the police chief in his press conference goes and makes the comment about the fact that this killer had checked out targets and had decided not to go after the other targets because there were people with guns there to stop her, why isn't that newsworthy? Why I want
Yeah.
somebody in the media to explain to me why time after time after time, when these guys explicitly talk about this, and even the police chief in this case mentioned in the news, you will look in vain for any national news media outlets to go and talk about that.
Yeah. Stag, I agree. Blue cheese is better. He's posting some stuff over on Rumble. I very quickly in the time we have left, because we're coming up on it, we're actually a little past. Just very quickly, Australia, the left loves to point to Australia. They got rid of all of their guns because there was in 1996, there was the
Tasmania
Port
shooter.
Arthur massacre.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
And
no, the Tasmania shooter.
yeah, in 1996, and so they had this big thing where they took all the guns, and you saw them, truckloads of guns, and they were burning them, and they were getting rid of
Right.
these guns, and they disarmed everybody. But now gun ownership is rising in Australia again, and they actually have more guns owned by civilians than they did before at the time of the Port Arthur
Okay, so this is
massacre.
what happened in 1996 and 1997. They had this gun confiscation. They call it a buyback, even though the government didn't own these guns to begin with, and they reduced the number of privately held guns by about 30%. People were able to go and buy guns again after that. They had different regulations that made it a little bit harder. But by 2010, the gun ownership rate in Australia was above what it was prior to 1996. So you have this big drop and then an increase over time. So, what you should imagine, the gun control people should predict then you should see a big sudden drop in homicides or firearm homicides, whatever they want to look at, and then an increase over time. That's not what you see at all. What they do is, and I really believe it's statistical malpractice in all the discussions, is they're looking at the before and after averages. They say the firearm homicide rate was lower on average after the so-called buyback than it was beforehand. But here's the problem. For 15 years in a row prior to this confiscation, firearm homicides and firearm suicides were falling. Okay. When the buyback occurred, it actually stopped falling, was flat for about 8 years in terms of the firearm homicide rate. If it's falling beforehand and flat afterwards, the after average is going to be below the before average. Now, if I were to give you a perfectly straight line that's falling over the whole period, you could pick any point along that line, and the after average is going to be below the before average. But I wouldn't want to look at just the before and after average. I want to say, does it fall at a faster rate or a slower rate? Is there some discontinuity that's occurring in the line there? Because if it's a perfectly straight line over the whole time, I'm going to look at it and say, it's falling before and afterwards. It's falling at the same rate. Nothing seems to change. It's not really obvious to me that the law had any effect. But the fact that it's falling before and stops falling and basically flat afterwards, to me, I look at it and it's almost bad rather than a benefit that's there. And the other thing is, um, uh, but it wasn't the big drop and then an increase that you would have seen if, in fact, it's related to the number of guns that are owned there. The other thing is, uh, the public health people I just think they're nuts on many ways. But one of the things they just insist on looking at is just looking at firearm homicides and firearm suicides. Most of suicides in Australia never involve firearms. Um, and if you look at total suicides actually went up after the confiscation that's there. But one of the things I'll just say, you can look around the world, and there are places that have either banned all guns or all handguns. There is not one place around the world that's banned either all guns or all handguns that's seen murder or homicide rates fall. There's not one place where it's even stayed the same. Every single time they've been banned, murder and homicide rates go up. And you think out of randomness, once or twice, it would go down, but every time it goes up. And
Interesting.
to me, that seems like a simple case. If they really believe that gun ownership on net is bad, it should be very easy to point to lots of cases where lives are saved as a result of that. The basic problem that you have is that when you go and you ban guns, and this is similar to the discussion that you were having earlier about gun-free zones, is who obeys the law. And as you were pointing out with gun-free zones, it's basically the law-abiding citizens, not the criminals. So if I pass a law that bans guns, where it's primarily the law-abiding good citizens who disarm, relative to criminals, I may take a few guns away from the criminals, but if I'm primarily disarming the law-abiding citizens, I'm going to make it easier for criminals to go and commit crime, and so crime goes up. And with regard to suicides, I can't find a single place in the world that's banned either all guns or all handguns where total suicides have gone down. Have
Yeah.
firearm
Wow.
suicides gone down? Yeah, firearm suicides have gone down, but not total suicides. And it seems to me, well, public health people refuse to look at the totals. They just look at firearm suicides. It seems to me that's the question. If I'm concerned about people committing a suicide, I should be concerned about whether they commit suicide rather than necessarily how they commit suicide
How
if
they
the total
committed.
suicides doesn't change.
Yeah. One last question, and then we got to go because I'm going to kill a gnat, and we've also passed an hour, which I like to keep it to an hour. Yitzhak says, "What's the stat? How many crimes are stopped by good people with guns?"
Okay. Well, you basically have two types of surveys that are done there. You have something from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the National Crime Victimization Survey, and then you have a whole series of surveys by academics and others. The surveys by academics and others basically show that something around 2 million times a year people use guns defensively. The surveys by the National Crime Victimization Survey shows that it's about 100,000. And there's a very simple reason for the difference between the two, and it has to do with the screening question that's asked before they get to the questions about asking you whether you've been a victim of how you've responded to the criminal. The National Crime Victimization Survey says, have you been a victim of a violent crime? And if you say no, they don't ask you any more questions on that. The other survey
Oh,
questions
okay.
will ask you a question, have you been threatened or somebody you've been with been threatened with violence? And and the thing is, if you ask them that, so the thing is, let's say I use a gun, and 95%
Sure.
of the time that people use guns, simply brandishing a gun sufficient to cause a criminal to break off an attack. I may not view myself as becoming a victim because I brandished the gun, the criminal ran away, nothing bad happened. That's there. And so the difference between the two surveys is that people who never felt that they were a victim because they were able to use a gun defensively may never get to the next questions there to go and ask, what crime
Yeah.
was involved or how they responded. And that's the difference between the two sets of surveys.
Yeah, interesting. It's always about how they ask the question because you can make the data say what you want, but a lot of it depends on how you ask or which questions you ask. Oreo says, "Thank you, John, for your time and great information." Yitzhak says, "Thanks for the data explainer there. I did not know that." So very interesting. Thank you
Well,
so
they
much for
should
being with
thank
me,
you
John.
should they should thank you, Mary, for having me on. So anyway,
Well, listen, you are one of my faves, and you always come. And with what's going on with crime in this country, I really wanted to have you on to talk about this. And
sure.
and I think one of the greatest deterrents for crime is the National Guard. So I'm very happy to
Well,
see
yeah,
the National
we
Guard.
put a lot more FBI agents and others on the street in DC. I think that had a major impact too on it. So, but anyway,
Oh, absolutely.
well,
Absolutely.
thank you very much for having.
Yitzhak says, thank you for the Nat humor. I'll let you go, John. Thank you so much for joining me. You are the best. You can find him on X at John R. Lott Jr. And also the website is crimeresearch.org. Check it out. Thank you, John.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
All right,
Bye-bye.
take
We'll
care.
see you soon. All right. Yitzhak says, thank you, Mr. Lott. Thank you, Mary. Thank you for the Nat humor. I swear this Nat, it landed on my hand. It landed on my hand. This thing is ballsy, this gnat. This gnat can't fly a lot because it's got big balls. Oreo says, we love you, Mary. Thank you so much. Remember tomorrow from 9 a.m. to noon, I'll be in for David Webb on on Sirius Patriot Channel. That's 125 on your Sirius XM radio. And then on Friday, I'm in for Rob Carson from noon to 3. And that is nationally syndicated. You can get it on the TuneIn app. Just look for Rob Carson, or you can go to WCBM. That's also on TuneIn. I believe it's on iHeart. It's out of Baltimore. That's his home station, and so it's that's the easiest one for me to send you to, as opposed to like looking for other stations around the country. WCBM. Oh, and this weekend I will be on the Wendy Bell Show on Newsmax Television, which airs Friday, Saturday. I believe it's Saturday and Sunday, maybe Friday as well. Not 100% sure, but I think so. Street Preacher, you were great on web today. Thank you so much. I love doing David Show because it's a great audience. So yeah, so thank you so much for subscribing. Thank you so much for Stag over there on Rumble. Yes, getting some rumbles up there. Thank you so much, Stag. I appreciate you. Daniel over there. And we also have Lexus over there as well. I appreciate all the rumbles. Thank you to everybody. You guys are great. Yitzhak, noon to 3. I'm tired of Wilcow yelling. He never takes off. Andrew never ever takes off. He is a crazy worker. So, but I'm noon to 3 on Friday for Rob Carson. So, and I'll see you on Newsmax this weekend. And then next Monday on the Chris Salcedo Show, which is now 5 to 6. He moved from 4 to 5. He's now 5 to 6 on Newsmax TV. So everybody, thank you so much. Have a fantastic rest of your week. Have a great weekend, and I will see you next Tuesday. Bye.